When I look at our club, we struggle down the stretch, to me, more offensively than in anything that we did. And you can look at things a couple different ways. You could say, were they tired? I don't know. Everyone during the course of the season is physically going to get wore down because it's a grind. But one of my oldest players played as much as anyone and thrived in the situation, Carlos Beltran. And I'm talking about the second half. He had a couple days off. One of them was in a doubleheader. He DH'd a couple other ones. We do have a lot of players that are considered what to be the prime age. We have some older players in Alex and Carlos. Alex never played the field, really. Didn't play really more than 6 days in a row very often at the end. So the question that you're asking me is you're asking me to, talk about my performance as a manager. With the information in front of me and being prepared and the discussions that I had with my coaches, I did what I thought was right every day. The bottom line is we didn't win, so that's going to be questioned. And I understand that. Hindsight can be 20/20. Could you have done something different? But in saying that, we're not so sure that would have worked any better. And that's the bottom line. So while I did the best I could, is the bottom line. And, people thought that I could have done better. I understand that. And, so you live with it.
Sweeney.
Joe, you had, down the stretch, you talked about guys just kind of wearing down. But even you mentioned your two oldest players had maybe two of the best years on the team, and A-Rod and Beltran. Is it troubling to you at all that you went to great lengths in the final month or so of the season to get extra rest for players, and they still wore down and didn't bounce back?
Yeah, you always try to put a reason on certain things, try to understand it. How can you learn from that? Maybe do you try to do something different next year in these situations? And it's something that I'll think long and hard about the winter. As I said, we do have a lot of players in their prime, what would be considered their prime years. And for whatever reason, some guys struggled the second half, the last month, whatever it is. And I think that the one person I think you worry as much about as anyone on a club that's an everyday player is always a catcher, especially if he's an offensive catcher. What kind of numbers is he going to have in the month of September? So I'll evaluate what I did with Brian McCann this year and maybe see, could you do a little bit different next year, that sort of thing, to physically keep him strong, because he's a huge part of our offense.
Andrew.
Joe, what do you think happened to Dellin toward the end of the year?
I think he became a little human. That's all. It's not like he had a 4 ERA in those months. He still pitched pretty well. I know he gave up a run the other day in the playoff game, but you look at the hit. You're giving up a hit to one of the best hitters in the game, in a sense, when it comes to getting base hits. That sort of situation. So, there were a lot of question marks on me about how much I used Dellin and during the course of the season, and was I using him more? Does anyone know how many pitches he threw this year compared to last year? I would bet not. And does anyone know that he was shut down about the last 10 days of September last year? He threw 5 more pitches in the regular season this year than last year. So I was cognizant of his workload. I studied his workload the year that he was in AAA and had so much success out of the bullpen. So when I look at what happened to Dellin, I don't know, he had a human month. We've seen other great relievers have a human month. Really, really good relievers have a human month. So, when I look at our bullpen, I think a lot of questions were answered. We weren't sure when we came into spring training who was going to be the closer. Andrew Miller did a tremendous job. We weren't exactly sure who was going to be our seventh inning guy. Justin Wilson did a tremendous job. So in moving forward, a lot of the questions that we had this year have been answered next year. We weren't sure what we were going to get out of Didi. We weren't sure exactly. We had a belief of what he was going to be, and he became that guy. We had a lot of young kids that came up and contributed. Guys that started in Double-A. A Severino, a Bird, a Mason Williams. And I think there's more kids coming that are going to continue to help and really make an impact here. So, and asking Dell, I just think he really just had a human month.
Hokie and Barry.
Joe, now that it's over, how much of what we saw from Ellsbury and Gardner in the second half was injury related?
Els felt good. I mean, he physically, felt pretty good the second half. He did run into the wall, and I think it affected his shoulder a little bit, but I would continue to ask him about it. And I know those guys would never make that excuse. Speed guys are going to get beat up as much as anyone. So in saying that, a thing with a Brett Gardner, I'll look at how I used him. Some of the months he was so good. It was unbelievable. And they're always somewhere in between. Usually, they're tough months and they're good months. But we tried to get him rest. I think there was a point where Gardy had 3 days off in September, and then I tried to give him another couple days off, and we tried to give these guys rest.
Joe, at the trade deadline, you guys made an organizational decision to keep these kids and develop them rather than go out and try to make a splash like, say, Toronto did to build for this year. How comfortable were you in retrospect with that decision? Because you got so much playing time for the Severinos, Birds, Refsniders moving forward, which answers, again, some of your questions going into next year at the expense of maybe going a little bit further this year.
Well, I think when you look at the contributions they made, I think we made the right moves. I know what David Price did extremely well in his 10, 12 starts over there. I know Johnny Cueto had some struggles over there. But when I look at Severino's body of work, I think we're all pretty pleased with what we saw, and we're glad we kept him. I think when we look at Bird's work, I think we're pretty pleased and probably glad that we kept him. And I look at other players that, some of the players that finished in AAA, and Aaron Judge, we feel is going to make a big impact. We feel that a Gary Sanchez is going to make a big impact the year that he had and the improvements that he made. So I think the organization, made the right decisions, not giving up, if you want to call them your top prospects, your blue chip prospects, just for a 2-month rental. I think it might have been different than possibly trading those guys if it would have been someone that you were going to have the next 5, 6, 7 years, and you were going to be able to keep them.
Anthony.
Joe, obviously, Jacoby's a big-name player, makes a lot of money, didn't start a playoff game. Is there fence mending that you need to do with him this winter going into spring training?
You know what? There's a lot of hard decisions that I have to make during the course of a season. And at times I set Gardy for Chris Young. At times I set Els for Chris Young. And as far as fence mending, that's to be determined, I guess, as I talk through things with all the players over the course of the winter. But, I had to make a decision. And as I told you, it was not an easy decision. I went through all kind of different scenarios and what these guys had done during the course of the season, and it came down to a body of work over the season against left-handers, and that's not an easy decision. Gardy has a pretty substantial contract as well. I have 3 outfielders that have pretty substantial contracts, and I did what I thought was the best at the time. Did it work out? No. But the question I'm going to be is, if you would have played Els, would it have been better? Would it have been 3 runs better? I don't know that. None of us know that. If I would have played this guy, would it have been better? That sort of thing. But as far as, that only time will tell. I thought we had a great conversation that day, and I thought his attitude was great that day. He had the right attitude. No player wants to sit there. If you play no player wants to sit. Even the guys that knew they didn't have a chance to start don't want to sit. They want to be out there. But that's the way you want it.
Sweeney and George.
Joe, as you talk about things with McCann and Gardner and their second halves, I mean, you talk about things that you have to look at. Are you thinking today that more rest might have to be one of the options? Is it their off-season conditioning? As you sit here today, before you get into all the winter, what are you thinking is the solution?
Sweeney, I don't have an answer to that yet. It's a lot of times it's really hard when you're in a division fight and you're trying to win your division to sit a guy that was 12 for his last 26 and had 4 homers and 19 RBIs. It's really hard to sit that guy, and then when you sit him, people say, "What the heck are you doing?" It's difficult, and as I said, they're in what you're considered your prime age. It's not a Carlos Beltran. It's not an Alex Rodriguez that you're worried about in the month of September. So it's things that I'm going to look at to see, can you do it any different, and how does it work? And if you decide that you're going to do it different, you have to make the players understand, this is why I'm going to do this way. And again, a guy may be cold in April, and he gets his time sitting there, and all of a sudden he takes off June, July, August, and September. It could be different next year.
George.
Joe, 2 things. When you were going through the Young Ellsbury thing, did you ever think of DHing Carlos and playing Young in right field?
Well, Alex had been a guy that had been one of our more successful guys against left-handers during the course of the season as well. So, no, I did not. I felt like Alex would have to have a big impact for us to win that game. I look at our situation that kind of parallels Pittsburgh's in a sense that we both ran up against a pitcher that is probably going to be Cy Young that had a lot of success against the team that year. I think Arrieta was, 5-0 going into that game with an ERA of under 1. Keuchel was 3-0 or 2-0 against us with an ERA of 0, and they performed the way they had performed all year. So it was, it was a pitcher that had pitched extremely well against us. I know Pittsburgh had a lot better record than we did, but it was similar situations, and that's the danger of not winning your division when you run into a one-game playoff, and if the other team happens to have a Cy Young candidate, it's tough.
And Joe, coaching, do you expect them back? Where are you?
Yeah, we haven't even talked about that. I haven't even been in the office until today because, as I've said all along, it ends abruptly. It's very difficult for me. It's hard for me to watch the other games on TV, and I haven't even thought about that.
Brendan.
Assuming Alex and Mark are healthy coming out of spring training, do you expect Greg Bird to be on the 25-man roster coming out of spring?
That's not an answer I have for you now. I think you have to see how a team is constructed. He played extremely well for us, but I think you have to look at your club. We're 120. I saw a sign coming in. It said 122 days till spring training, and I was like, oh my gosh, I quite wasn't ready for that sign yet.
Julio in the back.
Joe, what is your wish list for 2016 season?
It's pretty plain and simple, to win the World Series. So whatever that takes, that's what my wish list is.
Wally.
Joe, considering the fact that you're contractually obligated at just about every position with the exception of second base and maybe a pitcher or two, why do you think the team will be appreciably better next year?
Well, I think a lot of those questions that we had going into spring training have answered. I think we saw improvement out of players during the course of the season. Aditi, you'll have, arguably you'll have a Severino for a full year. Michael has proved that he can stay healthy. You'll have more pitchers that we expect to be back, and not so many question marks. And I think there's more depth in our organization as these kids get closer, as we have to go to people because of injuries. So I expect us to be better.